Okay, so how's everybody doing? So let's go into the paint phase on this car. And before I do, I want to just quickly summarize a few things. So this is all a method that I like to use. Like I have several methods, like just over the years. I think a lot of, maybe veteran or mature painters that are on in their age have many variations of painting methods that they use. They could never really just sort of condense it down and say A, B, C, right? Because weathering is a personalized, subjective art form, and it's going to be different with every individual. I mean, there may be certain methods and procedures that cross over back and forth, but that's the beauty of the human sentient, right? In the creative sense that we mix and match and do things in a multitude of different ways. So I'm only going to show you how I do it. So if it can help you out, that's great. If it's not, then sorry to say so. But this is how I'm going to go about this car, and I'm going to try to have fun doing it, and I'm going to try to learn things as well, right? Because it's always a learning process. So the first thing that you need is a good reference. You can use digital or just hard copy format. I like the hard copy format because I like the old silver particle negative photographs. There's something about them. I can't quite explain it, but it may seem like splitting hairs, but when you get a beautiful, SLR, silver particle negative image, they're a thing of beauty, like they really are. And this is, the Canadian Rail Company pictorial. There's a whole series of these. This is Canadian National Boxcars Part 1. So I'm going to use a couple of these photos as a reference. So how the car or the model comes out in the end, like I'm not trying to copy exact. These are inspirational studies where I can see the different fades. So the general traditional color, as noted by these photographers like Brian Sermon and Charles Bohai, thank you, and I give them credit for these photos because they dedicated their life and resources to recording a wonderful history of Canadian and American railroad equipment, right from I think the 20s or 30s and onward. Like a lot of these photographs you'll see here, they're cars that were built in the 30s and 40s, but they've been photographed in the 80s. So that's what I'm going to do with this model. This model will ultimately go on a small base or diorama around the 80s. So that's why I'm going to weather it quite heavily based on some of these photographs. Okay? So this card, just for those of you that are wondering and maybe just need a reminder, this is an Intermountain Railway Company O-scale kit, okay? And they're excellent kits. Are they perfect? No, because no model is, but they're pretty close. And just a quick overview on what I did to this. Like I would prefer to have a complete undeck, which I have, which I'm going to do down the road, but this car came already with the livery painted on it. And the standard, what they call mineral brown color, right? And it is a paint. The actual molding of this plastic is a really dark brown. So this is a paint, okay? I don't know what kind of paint it is. I presume it's acrylic. It was 1990s, early 90s when they did these, so I'm not really sure. But you can see where I just tossed the top roof walk because I wanted to build scale, thinness, and separate planks here. Now there's a variation in this super detail because there's American cars and Canadian cars, and they do vary. Like they're very small details you might never notice. Like a lot of the Canadian cars had 8 rungs, where this has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Some of the fittings and the journals on the end of the coupler boxes, they're very small differences, and almost no absolute standard, but pretty close though, right? Okay, you can see where I added the door sliders to make these doors functional, which I'll take off and paint separately. You can see I added these tabs. These are not retainers. This strip is the retainer. Okay, the same as the bottom here. These are more cosmetic, although they're scale, but they don't function like the prototype. Okay. And then you can see I used the San Juan couplers. They're functional. And then I added these coupler lift bars with functional trip pins in the coupler as well. You can see it. I've shown that already before, but you can see it moves up and down. These air hoses, they're not bad. They're the ones that came with the Intermountain kit. There are better ones for this, but the ones I have, I don't have a lot of, and I'm saving them for a couple of other builds. You can see here I added this sort of step here with some photo etch, just some generic photo etch, and I framed in with evergreen plastic the platform there. That's just a nice touch there. And then I planked the inside, but not all of it, just part of it that you'll show, to make it more distinct, because there would have been a lot of wear and tear from forklifts going in and turning, right? Going in and turning. So I want to simulate that these were probably replaced at some point, maybe in the 60s or 70s, because this car was built in 1938. So it has quite a tenure, right? So we want to try to show that wear and tear. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to basically mix up paints. I'll just briefly show you the colors that I have here. So some of the basic colors that I almost always use, like somebody has asked, like what colors are good to start out with? Well, you should have black and white. I don't have any white here, but you should have black and white to tone down or darken colors. I use both Earth XF52 and Brown JGSDF. It's called XF72. They're almost identical, except this one is a little bit more faded. Go figure, right? And you can do the same with white paint by adding. So if you run out of Earth, you can't find Earth, this is your next best friend. So Earth colors and black. Excuse me, then you have these two, which I use a lot of. Linoleum Deck Brown XF79 and Hull Red XF9. So these are both colors I use to make rusts, and or in this case, shades of mineral brown for Canadian National, Canadian Pacific, and a lot of American railroads as well. Okay? And then you can see this was just a thin mix of rust, where I added orange to Linoleum Deck Brown. It's all trial and error. Like, I want to encourage you, just try stuff. Like, keep your extra bottles, clean them in IPA in a big pickle jar, put 50% water, 50% IPA, or 1 jug of IPA, 1 liter, soak them, and then just wash them in soapy water in a sink or whatever, and you can reuse these bottles or jars for mixing colors. Then I have these colors, which I really like. This is Buff and Deck 10, XF57 and XF55. Really excellent. Once again, all earth tone colors, right? Because essentially what you're going to get on a car is the earth residue from rain and weather being pulled up. You're going to find that, and the metal wear off the wheels, the dust, the metal dust from steel wheel to steel rail that gets kicked up, which these colors represent. Now, these colors here in these larger bottles, and if you can find these larger bottles, keep them and recycle them because they're excellent. You can see I take black and Linoleum Deck Brown, and I just make a really dark brown, which I call raw umber, which can vary dark to light. It really doesn't matter. And I use it for these underframe areas, because essentially when we see a car, right, like a model, what registers is what we see in the real world and what we correlate on the model. So this color here is almost always going to be, you know, very dark brown. Like, that's not as dark, but that's because of the shadow. But you can see on the wheels and so on, it's a combination of raw umber and buff and earth, etc. So it's not that complicated. They're just some basic shades of earth tone colors that are varied. Okay, and then of course this one here is a really important one to have, is flesh. XF15. Most people will look at this and say, oh, it's for figurines. No, it's not. It's not for figurines. You can use it for figurines, but this is a really good toner to tone down colors, or add white to this for fading. And I'm probably going to fade this car with an even lighter version of this, because it has like well, it has color to it. It's not just white. I don't like to just put white over a car unless the car is white or off-white. Okay, I want to throw something else in. So this is going to be roughly my base color, but I'm going to do something that I do sometimes that I don't usually talk about. So I'm going to hit this with the trucks. I'll do the wheels too and this bottom frame with this black, but this is not just black though. This is, well, it's called flat black, but what I did was I just took half of this here, black green XF27, and like, see the difference there, right? Of the lids. I mean, these aren't indicative of the actual color on the model, but you can see there's a variance there, right? Is that, how does that, can you see that? There's the green, like NATO, like all's NATO green is, for example, like when you see all the names NATO green, linoleum brown, Conrail blue, those are indicators to the consumer that, oh, if I get this, I have a Conrail look, I get this blue. Oh, if I get paint a NATO tank and need the dark or wheels, I go use NATO black. Well, NATO black is basically flat black with green added to it until it starts to shift to a color, because black is not a color. So you can mix all these colors or variations of them by just, you know, lightening or darkening them. So this makes nice for black. Like, I only like to use pure black for like a pin wash, like an extra dark side pop in contrast, or the polar opposite of a bright side white, like an ultimate highlight white. Very little though, right? So I'm going to paint this frame, this dark, what I call black green. Now you can get black green as XF27, or you can just mix it yourself, because it already has a kind of reflection to it, like the green, like built in, like a light reflection, okay? Okay, so since I consider Tamiya, any XF version of Tamiya, a primer, it doesn't matter what color I use that I put on first, because that's essentially what it is, right? It's going to act as a primer base for me. So this is a little bit heavier than normal. I would probably go at least 50% paint and IPA when I do a sort of a base coat like this, just to give it a little more heaviness. Okay, so here's the wheels. Okay, the wheel sets and axles, and there's a air reservoir tank. So this is that dark green with a, you know, fairly liberal coat on it. You can see how the light, so, you know, there's black, right? But there's green added to this black. You can see how it helps reflect the light better. See that? Without even, I mean, normally when you artificially paint light, you would, like where you see that, see how the rims flash? See that? You would paint that, right? On a model, or highlight that. But it's already existing now in the base coat. Like, you don't want to just cover this up now. Like, if you primer, you're just going to cover it all. Like, why would you do that? Like, why don't you use the primer to work for you as a minimal layer, right? And you're going to find too that with, you know, painting methodology and mixing of colors, you're only just going to develop a style. You're going to adopt a method, and you're going to use your style, and the way you mix paint will eventually dictate your style in combination of your emotion and your interpretation of things, of light and shadow and color. So it's not a matter of who's the best painter. It's a matter of what style do they paint, or what is their signature style, right? Like when they paint through their methodology, and practice. And through practice, you gain confidence. And when you have confidence, the sky's the limit what you'll attempt to do and achieve. It won't always work out. You'll fail sometimes, but for the most part, you'll be successful. And that's just part of the journey of learning to become a better painter, right? Okay, so this is the base coats, basically applied black. So now what I'm going to do is, this is much thinner. This dark, we could call this rail brown or a version of rail brown, whether it's darker or lighter. I try not to get too pedantic with paint colors. I just give a general kind of term, raw umber, darker, light, raw umber, whatever. Black with some green, or just, try not to get too caught up in that. I mean, you can if you want. If you want to label things, structure things, numbers and lists, there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't have time for that. I don't like it. I like to be free and just, let my emotions and my feelings be part of the painting process, so I don't get stagnated through the analytical, being bogged down by, oh, geez, I need this certain shade. No, just blow through it. Like this here, I know a lot of this might seem laborious for some, but I think it's important. So I can, I'm not going to use Tamiya washes on this because it'll leak through this, right, with IPA. But that's the method to my madness with Vallejo over Tamiya, is the very thing that, because Vallejo is thinned with water, at least I thin it with water, with a traditional brush I mean, not through the airbrush, I can put layers on this and create greater effects without cutting through this base or this primer in this case, right? Okay? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut in some of the same green black into the darker recesses. So now that I've done that underside, the dark color, right? Notice how I didn't mask off anything. I mean, I don't want to get any paint on the logos and the data, but I sprayed inside the car there, darkened it in there. I even darkened sprayed the couplers. Notice the overspray on the back of the dreadnought end here. I don't care about that. That's all going to go away when you start to fade the car and put washes on and introducing grime and dirt. That's all going to play. That'll just look like a hint of shadow, and you won't even know why it looks a certain way, but now you're seeing it ahead of time, right? That's why I don't worry about overspray. Yes, I paint parts separately, like doors, etc., but I'm not going to paint all these parts separately and then scrape the paint off and glue them on. If you want to do that, that's fine. That's the way you want to build your model. I like to get away with as much integrity of bond plastic to plastic, where a lot of this is scraped first already for the plastic, so that the model can take hits and take abuse and doesn't start to shed parts in 2 years, right? Okay, even though they all do at some point if you handle them. But yeah, so I can get away with an airbrush. That's the power of an airbrush, is you can spray thin layers of paint and control it. And if you're painting lots of thin layers, any layers that you maybe find offensive, you can just erase them with another color, the base color, whatever, along the way, and they end up working in your favor anyway. So remember how I painted this sort of a dark black, well, green black? And then I hit some just almost pure black along the edges there. And now I've got this dark umber color. And I just, oops, too much, just a light dust. That's it, done, right? Because the next color that I'm going to put on that is going to be a buff the same way. So you have this graduation of very subtle color tones shifting. Okay, so I just want to show you the wheel sets in the trucks quick. So the basically procedure on these so far, they're not finished, but they're getting close, only 2 coats of paint. So the base coat was this dark green black, right, which was 50-50, like good heavy, sort of good primering kind of base. But I never covered that over. I shot this here, which is now 80-20, or 75% IPA, 25% color of that brown, right, that umber brown that I dusted over. And look at the wheels. Like here, I'll show you a photo. See the photo? There's a better one there. See the color there? So I haven't put the buff in yet. You see the buff? The buff is all up on here. Like that'll go after I do all this fade and this weathering, but the same buff that's on the trucks is going to be carried up onto the car here. But you can see that I've already have the basis of the color. Like you're not going to get any closer than that. Once you, I mean, look at the glare on the wheel on the left and then the photo. A little bit of buff, light buff will do it, right? It'll finish that off, see? So it's not that complicated, right? So like a buff would be one of 2 colors. It could be this buff here, straight from the bottle, but very thin, or even a deck tan. You can basically do the whole underside of any freight car to look authentic with these 4 colors. If you lay on your dark green overspray first, you don't even really need to mask the cars off, because if it's super thin and the overspray goes up a little bit on the car, like this, then who cares? The airbrush will do that for you, right? Okay, so these 4 colors, the dark green, black, this umber that I told you is, right, the red, brown, and black variation of, dusted over, and then this super thin, like I would say 5-10% of paint and 90 to 95%. 90 is probably not enough. You test and just get enough, and so when you dust onto the wheels and the trucks and it dries, voila, you're done. It doesn't have to be complicated. Okay, and with an airbrush you can make short work. Like I can do this in 5 minutes easy, like all the trucks. So I could line up 20 cars and just go boom, 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 and within 10 minutes, like all the cars are done, basically, right? Except that you'd have to clean the wheels off, the treads. Oh, and then the treads later on, I'm just going to put a wash of Vallejo, water-based wash of aluminum or silver, depending on the effect that I want, as a static model. But if it's a roller, then you probably don't want to get paint on here. And if they're metal wheels, you can clean these up with IPA, pure IPA with a Q-tip after you do your wheels. You know what I mean? So it's pretty basic. It's not that complicated, really. Okay, so here's the stock door. See the difference? I mean, some box cars will look like, be a shade like that or like this. Which one's closer? The one on the right, isn't it? It's not mineral brown, it's just that umber color. Sprayed on so thin that this actual red brown, or what Intermountain might call just default mineral brown or whatever, which is closer to this color out here that's been masked off, see? Okay. And then I just dusted over first with the super pale flesh and then the super thin red brown, you can see. Right? It's more this. Okay. Now if I kept painting that with the same paint, building it up more, it would probably go a bit darker. See, so it's not just the color in the jar, right? It's the thin layers built up. And that is why I emphasize you should paint super thin and then graduate your color, because you might say, okay, stop. That's it. I don't need to do anymore. Like, why? I mean, how much paint was there? There's nothing. Like, you can't even measure the amount of paint per penny that went on this door, because it's 95% IPA, right? But the job is done almost, isn't it? And then you can come in here with a wash and highlight a dry brush or whatever, right? So this is just part of the fundamental that you need to try to understand if you want to be successful at airbrushing when it comes to weathering. You can make very short work of something, and then you wonder why, what, all that trouble to get my airbrush and thin that paint, and it's over, the whole procedure's over in 5 or 10 seconds? Yeah, that's right. That's the power of the airbrush. But if you're doing like 20 cars or 30 cars, then it makes sense, doesn't that, economically? Okay. Okay, so here's an example of, so I felt that fade, that flesh, light fade flesh, right, like a beige, let's just call it a beige, I used flesh, because color matters. It's too heavy. Like, this is at least, at the very least, I'd say about close to about 95% IPA, 95 to 10% paint, probably far less than 10%, I'd say maybe 5%. So I'm going to knock it down. So I'm just going to pour some back into this flesh jar, because that's not going to hurt. And you'll always know if it's too thin because it just won't show, right, by testing it. Like, it won't really show that much. And nothing is wasted, right? You just put some of that pigment back into one of your many multiple bottles if you're using Tamiya these days. And then I'm going to take this 99%. You can use 75%, 55% isopropyl alcohol if you want. You can even use rubbing alcohol. I don't use rubbing alcohol unless I'm in a pinch and it's all I have left, but rubbing alcohol doesn't have the same stripping qualities or dissolving qualities like as a solvent as isopropyl does. Anyway, that's for another discussion. But so here's really thin now. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to load this up, and then I'm going to show you on the car over the graphics, okay? Okay, so dealing with a painted car like this, you can see there's a type of sheen on here. That's going to go away when you use IPA-based acrylic. It'll flatten that out in no time. And the idea is to have super thin paint, just build up slow. It's going to fade some of this. I want to fade a little bit of this, and then when it's dry, I'm going to mask off some of this data. Like not a patch, but there are prototype cars like that. You can see here where they've repainted. That's probably not the best. Well, there. Like here's one here that's really prominent. See there? See how it's faded away? It's quite faded. Actually, some of these logos are so badly faded, they're hardly legible. Like they just, I mean, think about it. Like they haven't been painted. I mean, look at that one there. All right. So there's a lot of different ways you can achieve that, right? There's no one method, you see, to do that kind of thing. Now, I'm just showing you techniques and methods that help you get there. Like, I mean, I could just take this car the way it is, and I could just basically load up IPA with tinted with this dark raw umber and just basically spray the whole car down and just start shooting paint on it. I'm not going to do that method here. I'm not in the mood to do that. And then just start power washing it off and letting the IPA oxidize and do its own thing. And that sometimes can give stunning effects. But I don't want to do that. And another thing is, will the IPA affect this paint? Well, you have to test that. Like I tested this already, put some IPA on one of these other cars, let it sit on there for a while, and it didn't really affect it. It doesn't mean it won't though, like over a longer period of time exposed to isopropyl alcohol. But these are quite resilient, this paint. It's almost like when I used to paint Tamiya back in the day, like overpaint them or try to strip them, they're almost nearly impossible to strip with isopropyl alcohol. But then on the other hand, an Atlas car, after a while, will start to eat through the paint of an Atlas car. So there's that, right? Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this faded beige color now, and I'm going to show you, because this is sort of a paint mule kind of car, and I'll be able to save it. You know, whatever I do to it doesn't really matter, because it's going to be a heavily weathered car, and I'll be able to save it anyway. I'm going to start on this panel right here. I'm just going to fade it down, and you can see that the flesh is really lends itself well to any kind of a brown color, okay? See the difference already? So we're starting to look at, excuse me, I have to change hands quite a bit here. This is not an easy thing to do. Here's an example. Look at the different shades from light of the roofs. They're all CN cars around the same period. See all the different color shades? Okay. And then, you know, clearly you can see, I mean, look at the grime on that one, right? Okay. So okay, so I just want to say at this point, so even with this pre-shade that is only one of multiple layers, early multiple foundational layers, it's toning down some of these other darker overspray, which eventually is going to get worked into the final color, and you won't even notice it. And I want it anyway, because it creates anomalies that makes the model look unique. People won't even know why, right? But I don't stress out about oversprays, because I can clean them up with any manner of color shades along the way. Because if, once again, if you're spraying super thin filters on a car, you can just keep building them up, and you never have to worry about thick paint. Like even the little bit of this light over the coupler here, it changes it. It starts to make it look like steel, right? If you look at it now, right? I mean, who would have thought that flesh and red, brown, or raw umber, that you could do that? You see? So at the end of the day, right, it's almost like less is always better, really, because it'll surprise you. Once again, you can't do that with a traditional brush without a lot more effort. And even then, you're not going to get that soft kind of effect. So that's already got some tooth on it. And we're starting to get the ball rolling, right? So I'm going to basically use up the rest of this on the roof, but this is going to get a light gray, almost sort of galvanized roof, and then we're going to do a chipping, some rubber masking on there because I want that roof to show age from chipping, etc. Over the course of time. And then this wood here is going to be based out with a type of gray, combination of grays and flesh, which I like as a base before you put an oil wash on. I'll probably use an oil wash or Vallejo, we'll see. Okay, so I found that my paint was just a little bit too heavy there, so I thinned it down some. But funny thing happened right here, which I really like. You can see it here. The pressure in my compressor tank, I turned it off for video purposes. I forgot to turn it back on, so I started getting low. And it started spattering over here, and I really like that. Now, this is going to get paint over gray, but I'm not going to opaque it gray, though, when I do the galvanized base. I'm going to lay it on thin, so some of that shows through the gray. And then when I mask it over and then repaint the top, mineral red brown, and then pull the masking off, I'll have this, not just a gray opaque galvanized look, but an actual mottled kind of weathered galvanized with a you know what I mean? So that's mistakes that you don't panic, right? Like that's the thing with weathering. Actually, weathering is probably far easier to paint because you're dealing with the anomalies of weather, really, like Mother Nature, right? So it's like, you know, don't sweat that stuff, because what Mother Nature does in the real world, we're trying to achieve in an hour what it has done over 40 years, 50 years, you know what I mean? So let those kind of things be your friend. So I'm just going to darken this out a bit. It's really thin. Once again, I like it thin so because it gets in like a wash, right? And it's not too heavy. And you'll discover, wow, look at that. It's actually cutting through some of the original and leaving a nice kind of effect. All right, so now when I do the gray, then there'll be a shadow underneath there. Okay, so I'm going to take some of this liquid mask by Vallejo. You can get it from art supply stores or other manufacturers. Number 70.523. Vallejo makes it. Nobody hardly ever buys it, but this is what I like to use it for. It's good for doing a lot of things. A lot of fine scale modelers use it for, you know, masking canopies, you know, parts that they want to cover up while they paint, etc. So it doesn't have a super long working time, and I like to take an old ratty old brush or whatever tool. It doesn't really matter, whatever you seem to like. And this is not going to work here, but I'm just going to wet this brush and show you quick how I do it. Like that, see? Of course, right? Forget that. I mean, there isn't a lot. Like you can see this photo right here. You can see it. Once again, you just want to try to be random. Just show you the other side. So whoever's been climbing up this ladder, they're probably going to make shortcuts. All right, the same way we would shortcut on a crosswalk, or, you know, it's life, right? There's a story on the wear and tear. So I'm going to add just a little bit more here to indicate, you know, that over the years, at their own risk, they decide to walk across the slippery part. You know, I had somebody say to me, I don't know, some way back somewhere, I don't know where it was, I don't know if it was online or whatever, but so what are you wasting all that tape for, right? It's like, okay, really? Haven't you heard of the art of masking? Like, if you're building, like in this scale, I wouldn't do this in HO, but if you're building a Proto 48 O scale, why not? That's what the tape is for, right? If you're not willing to spend $6 on a roll of tape, which you won't use all of it anyway, to pull off a model a certain way, well then maybe you're in the wrong hobby. I mean, I don't know, I've never heard of that before. Like, for example, like, see these hard lines right here? I want to paint those. I don't want to try with a wash. It ends up, just the wash goes, it darkens area. I want a hard line. Okay, and then when I put washes on, it'll soften these edges. But this is very distinct on these older CNR cars, right? And yeah, there's probably other ways of doing it, but I like to do it this way. I like to do it with the airbrush, because I can control the, you know, the tone of the paint. I can, it's just part of the process. And then when I go to remelt the paint, when I do washes down the side, which you'll see later, it'll all make sense. It's not a waste of tape. That's what tape is for. Tape is part of the art. It's part of the hobby, right? Like, I think most people that model like this, like, you don't have to tell them that. But that's the answer. I mean, I don't know any other way to say it, really. Like, is there a nice way to say it? I don't know. I just call it out. It's just, if you're in this game, you should have rolls of Tamiya tape on hand, because, you know, that's what, it's part of the art. It's part of the skill set. It's part of the hobby. It's part of modeling a railroad when you're doing stuff like this. Anyway, so I'm almost done there. So, and then I'm going to leave the roof. I'll clean up this edge, and you'll see I'm going to hit a dark wash and then dark down the side. You'll see, it's all processed, right? It's going to look really cool, this car. I'm really happy with it so far. I feel really confident in the direction that I'm going with it. And in fact, what's cool about it, let me zoom out for a second. What's cool about this is it's really got me greased up for the other cars I want to do. I want to do a couple Canadian Pacifics. I love the Canadian Pacific with the scripted, you know, Canadian Pacific, and, you know, anyway, it's coming along. I'm going to deal with this pretty quick here, okay? Okay, so the doors are drying on the side there, and I haven't pulled the masking off, but that'll reveal some other shades that'll get modulated or reconciled through an oil wash, okay, at the end. Now you can see here, I'm going to spray in with the same color that I oversprayed on the roof and these doors. I'm going to spray these lines. I'm going to build these up a bit more so they come out dark. Okay, I'll just show you how I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to lay it in along this top sill here, right? Like I'm not worried about any kind of seepage with a lot of IPA content either. Like I almost want that, because later on I'm just going to spray a thin wash of this sort of violet brown down the sides, because I don't want to lose this herald mark or the reporting marks, right? And the way to preserve these and fade a car is to use thin multiple washes of different shades like I'm showing. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to just lay some dark in here and here. I'm going to do maybe a little bit of the end, like in here, like in these dreadnought ribs, you know, up under there. I'm going to work this violet color in, this brown kind of violet color. That's how I interpret it anyway. And then we'll peel the tape off, and then we'll have a look at it, and then we'll be getting close to some of the final steps, okay? Oops, I got my stool on my airline there. I lost my pressure there. Make sure that's turned off. Okay, so I'm gonna lay some dark, like see in behind the ladder here? See there? It's quite dark, in there. That's the two grab handles, which it's not. So I'm okay with getting some dark wash in there as well. And once again, I don't have to panic if I over wet it, because it's going to dry now and go a bit dark. And then I can come back and revisit it and say, well, I want to put some more in there. So I'm going to just lightly lay on through these stripes. No, I don't want to get paint on my book. I'm going to do this top sill here. Now it's going to look wet, right? You're going to wonder, oh, where's the paint? Where's the pigment? Don't worry, it's there. And if it's settled in the cup a bit, it'll come. But let it come when it wants, if it settles. Because it will do that after a while. And then once it's dry, you just keep doing this and just building it up. That way you won't go into a panic. And then furthermore, when the IPA separates now and again and it hits other areas, it's going to do oxidizations and things that are really, really cool. Okay, so now we're just going to remove some of the liquid mask on the roof of this car. This is just American Art Clay Company tool, rubber tool with a rubber wedge on the end, and then a tapered pointer here, which is really perfect for this kind of thing, for removing rubber mask. So you can see that the rubber mask is there, like it's really obvious when you look at it at a certain angle. You can see the lump, the sort of lumpy so you can see that the original color, remember how it was gray with a little bit of thinned red overspray, red brown, and when I put the liquid mask on and then repainted the top 2 or 3 times with some thin oxide or mineral brown shades, you can see there now you can expose the galvanized metal surface of the roof. Some of these cars tended to shed their paint. It works really nice in this scale, in 1/48 scale and up. This particular liquid mask looks really cool. So you can see what I'm doing here is I'm basically rubbing in oil, straight oil with no thinner. I'm leaching out the oil on a piece of manila paper or cardboard. And I want to bring back some of this mineral brown, like I'll show you a photo, like this. Okay, because I'm going to give it a final overspray with some super thin umber once I patch this out. Then I put in these automatic car identification decals on. These were the, I couldn't find O-scale ones, so I found G-scale ones. I just cut them down and put a black patch behind them and put them on top. And these are brand new put on, so they'll get flat coated and then faded so that you can't really see them that easily. So, but yeah, so I'm just working in some oil, covering up a few flood marks. This I don't really like here, so I'm going to work that over with some oil. But I'm not really worried because the door will go over like this, see? Okay. Okay, so this will be the final layer on this particular boxcar. And this is very thin, what I call rail brown, which is subjective, right? But it's very grimy kind of brown. And it's very thin, probably not thin enough. But what I'm after is, see, there's quite a bit of dark on this car. There's a couple of pictures here. There's this one. This is an old car, and this car still has the wooden roof walks, and it's in Winnipeg, Manitoba, June 15th, 1986. So there you have it, right? And that's the car that I'm doing, right there. It's not exact because I've been using 2 or 3 for inspiration, but you can see how I patched out a lot of the data here and some in here. And I'm just going to do a little bit of overspray just to tone down some of this here. And yeah, have a little bit of fun, but just tone it down and finish it off. Okay. And then I'll flat coat it. The key is very thin and very lot of air, like full air and little paint to build up. And it's always going to be quite a bit less than the prototype when you put it on the model. At least in my experience it is. That looks pretty good there. And then I'll flat coat it. So I just wanted to point this out quick in closing. So these little channel bars on here, as you see in this photo, these were for forklifts, to put the fork against to close the door. They had a lot of problems with these doors, so a lot of times they'd use forklifts and they'd scratch the side of the cars or severely damage them actually, and the doors. And the doors weren't that great anyway, these earlier doors. even though this photo, which is interesting, is 1981 in Meeting Creek, Alberta. And so this looks fairly new. This was added on around late 70s, or probably that year even. It doesn't look like there's a mark on it from a forklift. So yeah, they put the fork, they drive up the side, put the fork up against that where there's a knobby on there, and they just push that door closed tight. Because they were really painful, these doors, malfunctioning and jamming all the time. But you can see I basically used just a piece of number 261, this is O scale, right? Number 261 channel, and a little piece of scrap I glued on. Just scrap, like insignificant to even mention, really. And that's all it took. And then, you know, these doors slide in, of course, but yeah. Okay, how's everybody doing? So I'm just going to show you how I do the rust on this particular car. This is one of many ways, so just to be clear, this is not the only way to do it. If there's anybody out there that thinks that's what I'm implying, this channel is all about how I do things. I don't care how everybody else does their models, to be honest. I care that they're inspired. I care that they're open to education and research. Like, for example, research, like if you want to learn about rust, study photos, but also research, like read an article about how metal oxidizes. Like just spend, you know, whatever it takes, half an hour, and it'll transform your painting. Like when you do rust, like like photos are one thing, but they're only clips in time, moments in time. But what about all the context in between? Like when, like why is rust dark, almost black, and then why is it like orange sometimes? Fresh rust is usually orange, dark rust is very dark, right? So it's relative to usage and time and everything. And even though we applied on our models in a sort of, you know, spontaneous way or whatever, doesn't matter probably at the end of the day, but if you're really discerning about it and you're doing a period piece, then you kind of want to try to get it right, I guess. But so I'll just go over the paints quickly and the brushes that I use, just to familiarize those who care or want to maybe add to their kit or whatever. So I use the Vallejo colors because they're little eyedroppers and they're quick, and I only use tiny amounts. So these are some of the ones I use, like this light rust here, 71.129, which I don't use very often. This bottle will last me my lifetime if I keep care of it, probably. Because light rust should be used very, very minimalistically. Like that's one of the mistakes that people make when they do rust, is they add too much orange rust, and it's just it just doesn't go well. Use it tiny, tiny amounts if it's fresh, you know, running off rust. Or if you notice rail, if you look at rail, and you'll see one rail is really dark on the top where there hasn't been trains for years, even a decade. And then you'll notice a rail where it's not shiny because it's not being used, but it was a while ago and trains were recently on them. It'll be orange, okay? Here's a dark brown that I use that I'll stab in for a base. Like, you know, like here, like along these doors, you can't see yet that well, but it's just very dark because it's aged. And in this case, this forklift mod you know, was added to the door. So this would have been older because they'd be using this. I mean, maybe the odd Joe doesn't care or whatever, but you know, you should see some of the damage on some cars. The guy just wants to get the job done, right? And so, you know, he just wants to shove that door closed because they jammed all the time. And the forklift made short work of it, but it also destroyed the door eventually. And then there's these two here that I use quite a bit of: burnt umber 71.040 and 71.80 rust. This is a sort of in-between kind of color, right? So this will do a little tiny bit at the end if it's fresh, but these two work good together along with the dark brown. So that's the colors that I use like with water, because they dry rapidly, right? And I can put oil paint right over top of them. And then there's gouache. This is a type of watercolor acrylic, but it's really strong, like really strong, but it makes excellent rust washes. Like when you mix it with water, or you lay water down a trough and then you just dip your brush in this and dab it in, it's really has a high density factor of pigment to it. So those are kind of the water-based ones that I use, with a bit of gray and a touch of black if I need it now and again. Now what I want to show you here is how I do sort of streaking rust, and I'll show you on a piece of plastic so you can see it better in contrast before I put it on the car. But let me just, okay, I'll just point out, okay, so this is the oil that I use for the final streaking because it's transparent and it makes a nice finish over acrylic. This is Winsor & Newton. Now there's Gamblin, there's other military modeler oils that are good too. I don't know the origin or the company that they come from. I've just been using Winsor & Newton, the pro colors, usually not the student ones, most of my life, so why change? I know other oils are excellent too, like I really like the Gamblin. They have a softness, like a real tight, creamy kind of feel to them that I really like as well. But it depends what you're doing. It depends if you're dry brushing or doing a wash, a transparent wash, or streaking or whatever. But and each color makes a difference too. Did you know that? Like with the one manufacturer, the colors will feel different with the brush, like in terms of their viscosity, etc. So, but this is the one I'm going to use to finish the streaking from the forklift scrape damage that I'll show you. So I put a little bit just to wait. Now I'll just tell you about the brushes and then I'll show you. I just dabbed a bit onto a piece of cardboard, and you'll see a little bit of a blemish occurs around it, a sort of seepage. It sucks some of the oil, the excess oil out of the oil paint, which I don't really want. Sometimes you'll want it to be greasy and oily, but then don't expect it to dry anytime soon. So the more oil there is in oil paint, the longer it takes to dry. So if you're okay with putting a model on a shelf for a long time, then that's fine. I used oils up here, but I seeped all the oil out. And I dry brushed this, like rubbed it with an aggressive, really stiff, true oil brush, which I should talk about as well. Well, they sort of look like they're really tough, bristly like this. Oil brushes are not these soft ones. These are for acrylics or watercolors, but the oil's the stiff, and the reason why is because you're always on a canvas, you're going like this, right? And you'll destroy a watercolor or acrylic brush of any kind in short order when you use them with oils, like when you're doing this kind of work, hard blending and you know, aggressive, you know, rubbing, right? So you can get them in different styles like this. Like I've used them like little stubby ones, like this, for example, is actually, it's called a peak dry brush. Now it's fairly stiff, but it's not an actual totally dedicated oil peak dry brush, but that's what they're like, and that's how I blend this kind of thing. So this dried in a day or two, right? It was good to go. That was oils blended into acrylics. And some oils too, but the oils over acrylics, when you seep the oil out, is a great combination because you can work the oils near the end much longer for, you know, rather than the acrylics drying too quickly, maybe, you know, kind of throwing off the process a bit, but if they dry too quick. So, excuse me. So I just use any little brush to stab in tiny amounts, which I'll show. So it doesn't matter. This is just a cheap $2 brush I picked up at Opus. And another thing on brushes, look for sales. Like, call up Opus or your art supply and ask them, when is your brush sale? I mean, they should give you an answer because they know they're going to get business from you. So that's what I do. So here's 3 brushes, well, 2 that I really like. This is called the Bristle Fan. It's really good for streaking, but I'm going to show you these 2 other grainers that are even better. But this works too when you soak it in thinner and then just put it onto your built up oil and then just pull down, right? But these are the 2 that I want to show you that I really like, that every modeler that likes to do streaking rush should have. So these are by Princeton Select, and they're called grainers. Okay, you can see one is 3/4 inch, one is 1/2 inch, and these are really cool because they're staggered, right? Like, you see the see how they're staggered, the bristles, like they're clipped out in between, and they're awesome because they're totally vertical bristles and they pull down beautifully, right? They don't pull to the center like a funnel or off to the side, really, if you pull the brush straight down. And I really love these because you just wet with solvent and then put it on and then just do one pull. You can do a couple if you have to, sometimes if you miss out on the bottom sill or something, but yeah, okay. Okay, so let's actually do it here. So now I take my grainer brush, this is the 1/2 inch one, and I just dip it into my odorless mineral spirits so it's wet, and then just tamp it like that. Now the trick here is to not go up and down, is to just go in one down motion. Just grab the top of the oil. Okay, it's easier on the card because the card is more steady, but this is greater contrast, so it'll show better. Okay, so you just grab it like this and go like that. Okay. And it takes a bit of practice, and it's probably a good idea to do this to warm up with, right? And if you get any on the top you don't like because it's oil, you can come in and you can blend it away. So that's the trick, is you come in on top like that, and if you want to clean for each stroke, you can. So wipe it off. And then grab it like this and just pull down, see? You'll get a different streak every time, and it's all random because of the way the bristles are dispersed on the grainer brush. Okay? So now what I'm going to do is just going to clean that for a second. Just wipe that. Lay that aside, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to, this isn't going to show as much on this dark car, but it'll be enough to just add that little hint of rust that I want to build up on here. So let's see, so let's just stab a little dots and random blobs, basically, along the dark old rust forklift scrapes, right? Because there is going to be some of this, even though it's older, but it won't be really orange, though. That's the beauty of this burnt sienna. This here is it's not really orangey, even though the color that it shows on the tube itself, it's not like that, right? I mean, it is on white, but it won't be on dark background. And this is mineral brown in this case. Yeah, I'll just put a little bit right here, there, and then I'll build up a little bit more heavier here on the door, like where the forklift sort of jams, like when the door actually closes finally, or the fork, you know how forks on forklift, they kind of rattle. I've driven forklifts way back in the day, and they sort of float and rattle around, and if you jam them into things, they sort of buckle and make a racket and sort of wobble about, right? Because they're adjustable, right? So when they hit, when that door slams shut, I'm sure that the guy can't stop the forklift in time, all like perfectly. So it really jars the door and probably creates more wear and tear along the edge here. Okay, so you can see there's 2 colors of acrylic in here. There's the very dark brown, and then this rust dabbed in over top of it just to create a little variation on there. Okay, so now I'm probably not going to be able to get a full stroke down because the sills or the door track is in the way before the end of the sill. But that doesn't matter. I can just blend some of that away because it'll be more prominent where the raw rust is forming and then dripping down, okay? So I'm going to re-dip that brush in there just so I make sure I got enough wet there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start, I'll start here. And that's it. That's all it takes. And if I don't like some of the, when I do the return on the brush, I can come in here and putting mineral spirits right over acrylic, it won't do nothing to the acrylic. It'll just evaporate away, which is kind of nice. Just along the top here. Yeah, I like that. And I'll let that dry and that'll look really cool. Okay? So this is a last minute revision. When I first set out to do this car, I wanted to sort of warm up with it because I got a few, right? And I want to do a couple of pure undex or strip the CN off the next one, but because I want to do a CP, a couple of CP units as well. But I didn't think I would add this, but I did more research, and like a lot of these cars were sort of reinforced, like there was rivets, like posts, metal posts put in behind this car with 5 rivets on each side of the door. Okay. And then there were different plates, like I added one here, a corner brace, and there was one here because there's probably one that has something to do with the beam under the car. And then some of them had reinforcements along the bottom sill as well below the door, but not all of them though, because like this one here is a grain car, it's an earlier one, but it only has the corner brace here. It doesn't have one there, and it has nothing underneath the sill. So see the distance here, this sill right here, and the corner brace? Now look at this one. Corner brace, there's another brace here for the post underneath, or the cross member on the frame. It also has heavier jack stand lifts here. And it has this beefed up bottom sill here as well, see? So, you know, they weren't all done in a perfect world, like they didn't take them out of circulation and then do them all. They just did them as they went along when maybe the wheels or bearings needed to be packed out, or trucks or wheels needed to be serviced. That's what this yellow dot on the black box is for. It would signify that these were done, and I think it was about an 18-month rating on these trucks and bearings indicated by this inspection yellow dot here. Of course, you can see the forklift modification there as well, but this one's quite beefed up. But this one here, I'm not going to do the bottom sill, but I may do other ones if it's requested. I think that was just a CN thing, but it might not be, but there were a few varied standards. So I'm going to drill 5 holes, and then I'm going to just insert some of these rivets by Tishi Train Group, which I like. I figure they're around 70 thou or so. And the interesting thing about this, doing them later, is actually I have some 60 thou as well. I think they might be more appropriate. The nice thing about these is I can put a little spot of primer paint, like flesh, almost primer, kind of like the way these are. And then I'll just paint the rivet first and then insert it in with matte medium. And then they'll pop a bit more, so you'll see that there was a modification done on the car. So that's the method of my madness there. Okay. So just to close these rivets up, I'm just going to take a little bit of this muddy kind of tint here and just put a little bit of a spot wash over top. And the actual, because these rivets are already a tight fit, this little bit of paint capillaried in with this wash will seal the rivet in place without leaving an ugly glue mark. And one other thing, just in closing, I wanted to remind myself that guess what? This door slides open, so I can't put rivets there. They'd be a little bit smaller maybe. Otherwise the door would get caught on them. But since this door is going to be open like that, like in the photo with the board going across, I will probably have to nibble off these ones because this door I'm going to have open just a little bit. Excuse me. Because I'm not going to be able to, I just realized this, isn't this the way it is when you're building these things? See there? And the rivets are in the way. At least these ones down in the bottom and top. I could bow the door to slide it over, but that's not going to work. So I'll just have to nibble them off because you won't see them anyway. And I probably overscaled these a bit too much. So you win some, you lose some, right? There we go. Okay, and last but not least, we know the doors go on. Here's the planker that I made, as per photo, close enough, I think. And I'm going to glue that. You can see where it's not painted. I'm going to glue this on the inside like that. And then the door, of course, will sit the other door. Like that. And you can see just in closing, like this photo doesn't have the reinforcing that this one has. It didn't have the modification of the forklift push bar, you know, but it doesn't matter, right? I mean, it has the angled herald, but it has a different font, see? Canada's largest railway serves all Canada. But that was an anomaly between the 23rd and 24th corridor placed with the Eastern Car Company. That would be built between October 1945 and March 1946. 1,000 boxcars appeared with this slogan right here. There were thousands and thousands of these cars built. And like I say, they were pushed into grain service and extended a decade or two more than they did down in the States, because down in America they were using hoppers, cylindrical hoppers, etc., or other types of grain moving rolling stock. So they used these because they were lighter and they could serve the lighter rail branch lines in the little towns in Alberta and Saskatchewan, right? The little grain elevators that were dotted all over the place up in the northern part of Canada or interior. So it made sense. They just pressed them into service, kept them in service for that reason, right? It was quite brutal to unload these. Actually, my dad used to do, I'll just say in closing the story, There was a point where my dad, I think it was in the 50s, he unloaded cars like this out here in Vancouver, or in the Fraser Valley. And they used big shovels, I think, and big boards, these big like 4x8 sheets and whatever to push the, when it got down low, they had their own ways of just pushing all that grain out, right? They would open the door and they just push it all out into a bunker or a catch device of some sort, which probably varied as well. But it's kind of neat, eh? And they would actually load the grain, like on the other side, let's say, like they'd have boards all the way down, and they would have this chute that would go in like this. It would just pour grain in it, and that's how they'd fill the boxcar with it, up to a certain height. And then these boards were everywhere, like they were all over where the grain elevator and the delivery places, and apparently they were one of the most stolen commodities during that time because of the quality of the lumber was good, and people used them to build sheds and homes and shacks and whatever, right? They stole them, and I guess the railroads looked the other way because it was a small price to pay for, you know, the amount of money they were making moving grain, right? Anyway, it's kind of cool, right? It's a lot of fun. This has been a lot of fun, this build. Actually, I learned a lot from it, about railroad history too. It took me back and, you know, told my dad about it, and he said, oh, that sounds really interesting, that boxcar. Anyway, he probably, like if I showed him this, it'd probably bring back memories. Okay?